Alright guys, we're back here with another video, another Warhammer video, this time on the lore of high magic. A lot of this video will be me pretty much going over the high magic that the High Elves use, and now, as of 8th edition, the Wood Elves and the Lizardmen, but I'll be going over the magic as a whole, and kind of going over what we've already seen in some of the trailers, what we might be looking for as we hear more about the high magic and the High Elves themselves. But I'll go over what's in the book as far as the spells in 8th and 7th edition, because I feel like they're probably going to pull from those two pools of spells, and we'll talk about how they're done in the tabletop and what I think they're going to be like, or what spells are comparable in Total War Warhammer 1. So we'll go into a little backstory here about the lore of high magic, or as I would pronounce it, Qaish. It's very difficult to pronounce here. It's Qhaysh. And the really cool thing about this is that it is all 8 winds of magic woven together. When High Elves become mages, they learn all 8 of the base lores that we're already familiar with, you know, like the lore of metal, the lore of fire, shadows, death, etc. But we also know then that it takes many centuries to learn the lore of high magic, and especially to master that. So previously, the lore of high magic was a high elf only lore, just like Dahar, the lore of dark magic, was a dark elf only lore. In 8th edition, Wood Elves and Lizardmen got access to that lore, and for the most part, though, they have the same spells, but different lore attributes. And lore attributes, as you guys already know, that are from the current list of lores in Total War Warhammer 1, they're the abilities like Wild Heart, or Kindle Flame, or Life Leeching, those persistent passives that all the lores get, like Smoke and Mirrors, and so on and so forth. The difference being in 8th edition that each races, High Elf, Wood Elf, and Lizardmen, have gotten a different lore attribute to help differentiate their usage of the lore of high magic. But I'll touch on the lore attributes when I show you guys the actual lores themselves. I'm going to show you screenshots from inside the book so you can see what it looks like for those of us playing the tabletop, and you get a good idea for the little flavor text and everything that has to do with the lores themselves. And I'll read the flavor a little bit for you so you guys can, again, know what you're kind of stepping into. But all of the tabletop lores have signature spells. And those signature spells are spells that the mage automatically gets for choosing that lore. Otherwise, you have to roll to decide which spells you get, and your level of a wizard in the tabletop determines which spells, or how many die you roll. Obviously, that's not going to make a translation into Total War Warhammer 2, because as we've seen with all other practitioners of any other lore in the Total War Warhammer world, they can access everything. We'll start off with the signature spells here. The two big ones with the lore of high magic are Drain Magic and Soul Quench. Two really awesome abilities. Soul Quench being kind of a little more, I guess you could say, I don't want to say average, but it's something we're already used to. But we'll start off with Drain Magic here. And Drain Magic is really an interesting spell, because if it comes into the game the way I think it will, it'll be one of the very first actual dispel spells that will negate any active spell effects from a target unit. In the tabletop, you can actually boost it. You can overcast it to actually be a bubble, an area of effect around the caster. So what I really see how that translates into Total War Warhammer 2 is I could see that just being the ability to dispel a buff, or maybe even dispel a hex, like an augment or a hex, on a target unit. Alternatively, I could see that being overcasted to either a bubble around the caster itself or to a targeted AoE. So that way, you're saying, okay, hey, their whole front line is benefiting from an overcast healing spell. Okay, great. Boom, I'll dispel, I'll drain that magic, I'll negate that healing spell to that whole front line that he casted on. Because you can see already the telegraph of how they're casting, you can kind of mirror right on top of it. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a mechanic very similar to that. Or at least some sort of ability. I know in the trailer, in the cinematic trailer, Teclis cast an ability that put up a ward that negated and deflected all ranged attacks I don't know if Drain Magic is going to have that ability or not. That's, I mean, all this right now is purely speculative, but that's like kind of a reaching speculative point. Just because I saw it in a cinematic with a really cool mage and a really cool ability, it's kind of hard for me to make that jump into what it would actually be in the in Total War Warhammer 2, because it's not like that in tabletop either. There's nothing that's quite like that. There are things like in the Lore of Heavens that, like Blizzard, that makes it so that it makes it harder for them to shoot, but I don't think with Drain Magic we're going to be seeing things completely negate or deflect ranged missiles. But it would be really awesome if they did. Soul Quench, like I was saying though, we're moving on to another spell here, the other signature spell. Now Soul Quench, as you see here, is the other ability that we saw from the in-engine trailer, the Lizardmen in-engine trailer. You've got that High Elf Mage casting that spell, big old white ball shooting at that Pterodon before it gets knocked off the little guy here. What I just said the name of, that was Soul Quench, or at least the closest thing that I can imagine Soul Quench to be in Total War Warhammer 2, because Soul Quench is simply just a magic missile. The base form of it is a pretty moderate damage ability, but you can overcast it to be even stronger. So I would expect that to kind of play into that as well. And like I was saying, these are all 8 winds woven together. So Soul Quench kind of has some attributes of maybe even like the Lore of Death, like the Gaze of Nagash or Life Leech. Spirit Leech. So you've got an ability that's going to be just a quick instant cast onto something and do some damage. I don't see it being an actual missile in the sense of Fireball. I see it being a little bit more, locked onto the target. Fireball you can completely screw up if you don't cast it right, but I think the Soul Quench will actually kind of lock on a little bit harder, or maybe just be a faster traveling missile that'll actually hit. But that's just the signature spells of Lore of High Magic. Soul Quench has a similar name. Back in the old 7th edition days, Fury of Cain was essentially the same thing. It was, for those of you that played tabletop, 2d6 strength 4 hits. So again, almost the exact same thing here. But just to kind of go into some of the flavor, like I was saying, there's not a whole ton in 8th edition. They made things kind of, I don't want to say flat, but they made them more broad so that anyone practicing the spell, it's obvious that there's multiple practitioners across multiple races. In 7th edition, as you see, it's exclusive to High Elves casting High Magic. But for Drain Magic, the wizard conjures a vortex of anti-magic to calm the battlefield. And for Soul Quench, white light bursts forth, banishing the spirits of those it touches. So, very haughty, very, very romantic, and awesomely sweeping in its nomenclature and wording, but still very broad and applicable to multiple races. So we'll move over to Apotheosis here. Waves of pure magic infuse the wizard's ally. And that is basically, it's just a healing spell to just kind of, jump to what essentially makes it important is it is a healing spell that grants fear, which is a pretty cool mechanic to just kind of have on a rank and file unit like a spearman in a High Elf army to say, okay, hey, front line's starting to buckle a little bit. I'll cast Apotheosis, which should heal that unit and allow that unit to then cause fear. If they go a direct translation across. And I would say that the overcast on that would be one of two things. It's either going to be an AoE like we see in Earthblood, or it's going to be a increased duration. So maybe your whole front line gets healed and then starts causing fear, or maybe your one unit gets a longer or maybe even a more sufficient heal. So I'm really interested to see how that's going to play out. Are they going to have it single target, or are they going to have it an AoE? I think actually, regrowth. Regrowth is that Lore of Life ability that can be, they can target an area. But moving on here, the Hand of Glory being the other spell, the second spell in the Lore of High Magic. With a simple sign, the wizard grants his allies the might of old. And this is going to be a pretty simple one. I see this as, well, the way it was in tabletop, it was basically the reverse Melkoth's Mystifying Miasma. So it was boosting weapon skill, ballistic skill, move, and initiative. And all 4 of those by D3. And how that translates into the Total War Warhammer world is weapon skill and ballistic skill can be said to be the attacks, melee attack and range attack. And move and initiative you can really see as speed and or vigor. I'm not really sure how they translate initiative into this. But so I would see that this ability would be Hand of Glory in Total War Warhammer 2 would be a melee attack and a speed buff. And overcasting it might make it for a longer duration. It could have an AoE ability. A lot of the High Elves in general are somewhat defensive, and I think we're going to see that play out in Total War Warhammer 2 as well. Not defensive in the sense that the dwarves are, but they have the lore of high magic itself is a rather defensive capability. You know, drain magic is going to negate things that are happening negatively to your units or positively to your opponent. And Apotheosis is a healing ability, and Hand of Glory is a buffing ability. So you already have a really good idea of how this magic really works. It's very augmentative of your units and less so of the enemy. That's more in lore of dark magic, which we'll get into in a separate video. But that's just Hand of Glory here. There's 3 other spells, and I'm mainly touching on the 8th edition spells. We'll go into some of the 7th edition spells I think they'll have, but I want to start off with a good starting point with these so you guys have a good idea of what's already, well, what was previously most in the game, and which Total War Warhammer 1 and 2 most closely reflect. But then we've got Walk Between Worlds here. For a moment, the wizard's allies tread immortal pathways. And it would be interesting to see this enter the game in its tabletop iteration, because the tabletop iteration essentially makes it so that the target unit gains ethereal and can move immediately. There's movement phases in the tabletop. Obviously, that's not going to be the case in Total War Warhammer 2, but I would be very interested to see it grant a unit ethereal, because you can think of how that can be extremely beneficial, you know? Maybe you're fighting against a unit like Orc, or an army like Orcs, which doesn't have a whole ton of magic damage. So you can cast a unit, and I'm saying that the overcast on this is going to be a longer duration. Again, purely speculative, but I don't see them having you an AoE ability make your entire army ethereal, which would be rad. But I think that Hand of Glory, or I'm sorry, Walk Between Worlds is going to be a way to, okay, you know, against Orc players, I've got this ability, but maybe playing a 2v2 on a competitive multiplayer battle, maybe one guy's greenskins and one guy's Bretonia. And by doing that, you've actually also made your unit more susceptible to, say, the Grail Guardians or the Pegasus Knights. So there's going to be a trade-off if Walk Between Worlds indeed makes your units ethereal. And I can really imagine how that would play out in Total War Warhammer 2 from like a graphical standpoint. It'd be really cool just to see all of your units just immediately turn that ethereal kind of translucent color we get with Cairn Wraiths or any of the Fellowship of the Ring, as I call them, in Clan Angrand. But that's Walk Between Worlds here. I in tabletop have used it because it's really one of those things that it's not overly useful, but when you do use it, if you get the random chance to use it, it's kind of cool because you can get your unit that is way out of placement or way far away from an endangered unit right in front of them, or right in front of that line of conflict or combat. So maybe it's going to be an ethereal and a speed buff. Who knows? That movement capability of it is what is kind of up in the air for me. I don't think I don't think that'll make a direct translation into the game. I think it'll just be ethereal. But then we've got a Tempest here. Without warning, an 8-winded storm breaks about the foe. And Tempest is a pretty cool ability here because it is very unique. It is a large blast template in the tabletop, so just like you would expect how that would translate, you're going to be looking at a very large radius AoE damage capability. And it does pretty moderate damage to infantry units, but it does increase damage to flyers, and also makes it so that units that are targeted by it or within the AoE have a minus to their attack, or to hit roll is what it's called. So how I see that playing out is somewhat similar to you know, if you're trying to get an idea of what kind of winds of magic these abilities are basically channeling, Tempest is essentially a Lore of Heavens spell that was made exclusively for the lore of high magic. Apotheosis is a Lore of Life magic, you know, exclusively made for the lore of high magic. And Tempest, though, like I was saying, I would be interested to see if they did something where it did do more damage to flyers, because with this expansion or with this second game, Total War Warhammer 2, we're going to see a lot more flyers. We're going to see Great Eagles. We're going to see dragons. We're going to see pterodons. We're going to see dark dragons. We're going to see harpies, hopefully, and any of the other kind of dark elf flying creatures. Or we've already saw that we're going to see phoenixes in the High Elves. So I wouldn't be surprised if Tempest added a mechanic that was a debuff, or at least maybe a grounding capability for flying units to force them onto the ground, or maybe it did do more damage to flying units in general. But I also see Tempest as having an additional minus attack debuff on the spell itself. It will natively be an AoE, so I don't think overcasting it will make it an AoE, of course, but I think that overcasting it would probably either increase the damage or increase the duration of the debuff, if it indeed has one. There's a cool ability here now, and this is something that I've kind of touched on with the Lord Mazdamundi's mace, but Arcane Unforging or Vol's Unmasking, depending on which edition of Lore of High Magic you're looking at. Essentially what it does is it kind of summons from the lore of metal here, but let me get the flavor text for you. The magic of unmaking flies true from outstretched hands. And what it does is it does a little bit of damage, probably in the essence of, I would say, a small to moderate amount of damage, if it does indeed do damage with the following effect. Because what it does is it randomly destroys a magic item on a unit. And if Lord Mazdamundi has that capability with his mace, and Arcane Unforging has that ability, and we give Arcane Unforging or Lore of High Magic to both High Elves and Dark Elves, and Malekith has an ability that does that too. It makes me think that destroying magic items is an element of Total War Warhammer 2 that we're going to start seeing. Something that's not in Total War Warhammer 1, but something I think that would be really awesome and flavorful if they added it, even just on the campaign basis. Because, you know, you can steal which you kill off of someone, but it'd be interesting to see that on a competitive basis to use, say, an Arcane Unforging, and hopefully popping, say, Isabella von Karstein's Blood Chalice, or popping the Lord, what's this called? Todbringer's healing ability, or Sigvald's healing armor. So something that could basically turn an OP, quote unquote, Lord to a little bit less scary, you know, kind of level that playing field out. And I think that would be a really fun meta change, because you'd have to start worrying about that coming at you. But that's Arcane Unforging, and we're gonna top off the 8th edition High Magic spells here with Fiery Conviction, with a single secret word: fire rages and flesh burns. And this is one of my favorite abilities from tabletop. I don't really know if it's going to be making a direct translation here. It's kind of like a Fate of Buna or a Melkoth's Mystifying Miasma, in that it is a damage over time, and maybe the overcast on it is duration. In tabletop, it's pretty strong though, because the way it works is you cast it on a unit, and every single model in that unit takes damage every magic phase, so pretty much every turn. So it's until dispelled. So it's a lot stronger, obviously, in tabletop. I could just see it being, again, like a Fate of Buna, or like that Melkoth Mystifying Miasma, where it's just a simple AoE or single target dot with an increased duration on overcast. But I'm curious to see how they play with that one, if they do make it as strong as it is in its tabletop counterpart. But that kind of rounds off the 8th edition spells of the Lore of High Magic. I want to go into some of the 7th edition ones, though, because I think that they're going to be pretty awesome. And I actually think that they might be even in the game. Who knows? Because we've seen a lot of crazy stuff with Creative Assembly. They tend to kind of cover the gamut of their available source material, right? They put stuff in from all the editions that they think is going to be applicable to the game. So it wouldn't surprise me if some of these made it in here. So we'll start off here with the Courage of an Arian, and I'm going to read the flavor text of this. The High Elf Mage draws on the winds of magic and channels its power to embolden the Asur around him. All around the caster, High Elves recall the glory of an Arian and fight on with courage. So, actually, not Asur, but Asur is probably how I truly pronounce that. So, the Courage of an Arian, I think, is going to be great, because it's going to be just a simple buff, but I think it's going to grant stubborn, or at least maybe an immune to psychology to the unit, or an AoE around it. It might do immune to psychology, but it also might just do a leadership bonus, because that's the whole point of it. In the tabletop, what it does is any units that's going to take a break test, so something that would make them flee and run away, they're counting as stubborn, so they can re-roll their failed test there. Actually, no, I think stubborn actually negates their test altogether. But still, I think it's going to add some sort of immunopsychology mechanic, or at least a bonus to leadership into the High Elf army, if they do indeed add Courage of an Arian. I think that a lot of what's already in the 8th edition is going to be pretty better suited to the current meta and how a lot of the lores actually are worked out from a balance standpoint. If anything, maybe Arcane Unforging is going to be swapped out for Courage of an Arian, or Fiery Convocation. I'd say of the current 8th edition spells, Arcane Unforging, Fiery Convocation, and Walk Between Worlds are going to be the trickiest of the three to implement, because they have kind of a different mechanic that's either not seen or already too commonly seen, i.e. Fiery Conviction, and not seen with Walk Between Worlds and Arcane Unforging. Walk Between Worlds, again, remember, is the one that turns things ethereal, and Arcane Unforging is the thing that blows up magic items. But the other ability here that I want to go into is Curse of Arrow Attraction. As the mage completes his incantations, the air around the foe shimmers with magical energy as it warps and twists. Bolts and arrows that pass into the roiling field of sorcerer's power become blessed and strike the foe with unerring precision. So, rather than this deflecting of arrows like we saw in the cinematic trailer, it actually makes it so arrows are not necessarily more effective, but you can re-roll failed to hit, meaning that it would essentially increase your attack capability. So your likelihood to score a hit against your unit in Total War Warhammer 2. And I think that would be pretty cool, because there's nothing that's quite like that as far as spells go that would boost the missile effectiveness of a unit. And if they do indeed extend this out to the Wood Elves and the Lizardmen, it's going to be used to great effect in the Wood Elf lore. So I think that that's going to be pretty interesting here if we get that actual spell in the game, because it's going to be applicable to both High Elves and Wood Elves. Not so much the Lizardmen, but it's going to be definitely a game changer if it comes in for the Wood Elves, because it would make it so that either it's going to give that attack bonus I was talking about, or maybe even increase missile strength or something of the sort. So some kind of buff to missile damage is what I would suspect. And then the last spell I want to go into here before we touch on the lore attributes of the lore of high magic is the Flames of the Phoenix. Pure white flames emerge from the air itself and envelop the target, immolating the unworthy foe. With every passing second, the flames grow hotter, swiftly intensifying until they can sear flesh or even melt steel. So this is an ability that remains in play, and we have that ability in stuff like vortexes that's already in the game, but they don't kind of remain in play like they would in the tabletop. Like the Purple Sun of Xerius is over quite quick, but this would basically, how it works is it casts a phoenix that does damage, and it'll attack anything. So you can cast it on any unit within a certain range of the caster, and it does an immediate damage point, just like you would say like a magic missile or something of the sort. But it also will keep doing that and increasing its intensity. So turn 1 is a strength 3 hit, turn 2 is a strength 4 hit, turn 3 is a strength 5 hit, and so on and so forth. So it increases its strength every time it stays in play. And any damage done by it is, of course, as you would expect, with a name like Flames of the Phoenix, a flaming attack. But what I would kind of see this more as is something maybe as a line ability and less so as like a stacking ability. Because we haven't really seen anything like that in the current game. That would be maybe too new of a mechanic. So I could see this being something like a Winds of Death, or what's it called, a Burning Head, or whatever it's called from the Lore of Fire, where you're shooting a phoenix in a straight line and it's just immolating everything it touches and does line damage. Or maybe I'd say flaming and AP maybe, and just the attack in general, just doing its damage, and overcasting it would probably either make for a longer line or increase damage. that's kind of my pipe dream with Flames of the Phoenix. I think it'd just be awesome just to see something a la the Burning Head, like a giant phoenix emanating out from the caster and just swathing through the whole entire line. That would be just fucking awesome, as they say in France. But we've covered now all the spells of the lore of high magic. I just want to go into 3 real quick things here with the lore attributes. So like I was saying, we've got, you know, Wild Heart, Kindle Flame, Smoke and Mirrors, stuff like that. The passive bonuses that we get to the lores of other magics, or the magic of other lores. With the High Elves, you get Shield of Sapphire, and you see in every single one of these pictures I've shown you guys so far of the lores, you've got a different ability in the upper right corner that says lore attribute, and that's that passive ability. For the High Elves, it's the Shield of Sapphire, and this makes it so that anytime the High Elf Mage casts a spell, it grants them a +1 to their ward save with a stacking bonus. So how I would really see this in Total War Warhammer 2 is maybe if the mage casts a spell, he either grants or increases the ward save of his in his range, maybe. So it gets a kind of a stacking buff as he maybe burns through 1 or 2 spells in a quick kind of Winds of Magic dump, you know? And that would be a timed buff, I would think. So maybe if he's with Phoenix Guard, who are supposed to have an innate ward save, you could use the Shield of Sapphire with your High Elf Mage or Archmage close to them to get them an even bigger bonus. So it's kind of like having your Fey Enchantress in your back line to give your Bretonnians a little buff. You could have your High Elf Mage or Archmage in the back to give them that Shield of Sapphire buff as well. So it adds an extra element of defensiveness, like I was talking about, and tankiness to your High Elf army. Now, an interesting an interesting attribute is the Lizardmen version of the lore of high magic. Here's their picture here, as we've seen before, is Contemplation. Now, Contemplation makes it basically so if you cast a spell on the tabletop, that unit then forgets that spell and can immediately choose another one. I don't see that having that effect in Total War Warhammer 2. I do see it maybe having a bonus to the Winds of Magic or a slight regeneration buff. So let's say, you know, you cast 1 or 2 spells rapid fire and it has maybe a stacking buff on it that increases your Winds of Magic generation so you can get back to casting spells. Since the Lizardmen are so adept at casting spells and are so used to twisting and manipulating the Winds of Magic, I could see that being the case because I think it'd be really goddamn cool. And then the Wood Elves attribute for the lore of high magic is pretty nifty. They basically get a protection token, and any unsaved wound is then uses that protection token. So I'm not sure how it would work for the Wood Elves. Maybe it would be kind of like Wild Heart, where it's a passive. I'm sorry, not Wild Heart, but what's the lore of life capability? Life Bloom. That's what I'm thinking of. So maybe it's like Life Bloom, where it gives like a passive health regen, or maybe it gives us, like, every time you cast a spell, it gives a slight direct increase to health. Rather than actually being a gradual increase, it's maybe a quick shot of 500 HP, something like that. Or maybe it can help prevent their death if they cast enough spells or something like that. They get maybe an extra 5% life to kind of try and live through. But I'm interested to see if they do indeed use differing attributes for the lore of high magic, or if they just make lore of high magic high elf exclusive. It wouldn't overly surprise me. But then again, the Lizardmen have they don't have. Like I said, they just recently got the lore of high magic, but they do have some mechanics that are exclusive to Lizardmen that include just their Slan Priests that I'll go about into a different video as well. It has to do with disciplines of the old ones, I believe is what they're called. And we'll go into those as we do the lore of dark magic in another video, like I was saying. But that kind of rounds out the lore of high magic for us. Koyash as it is called. And that kind of gives you guys an idea of what to really expect with the lore of high magic in Total War Warhammer 2. I think it's going to be a really cool magic with a lot of really awesome supporting and buffing capabilities, but also some pretty unique offensive capabilities as well. as you've hopefully gotten a sense for from this video. But if you guys have any more questions about the lore itself, or any questions of its application or certain spells, or even if you have speculation of your own, please go ahead and comment. Let me know what your thoughts are. And then our next video of lore, we'll touch on one of the other ones, like the lore of dark magic or something of the sort. But thanks for watching, guys. Have a good one, and take care.